Coming up, a ridiculous hot take that plenty of SEC fans won't like, and some bad breaking news for Georgia on the injury front. It's all on the way next on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome into SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. There is a lot to cover on today's show. Coming up in just a couple of minutes' time, we will get into some significant injuries for Georgia. Not necessarily significant in terms of the amount of time the players will be out, but significant in terms of the fact that it is key names, Tyke Smith, Darnell Washington, tight end, and defensive back, and significant in that the current timeline as it's being described could impact their availability for week 1 against Clemson. We will do a lot of that on the show today before we are done. We'll talk plenty of Georgia Bulldogs here. I do want to, though, continue to start the show the way we had initially planned. Very interesting stuff coming from Colin Cowherd, who some people like, some people don't. When you're kind of and I'm doing something very similar right now. When you're the kind of blowhard that speaks into a microphone for a living, you are going to make some fans. You're going to not have some fans. You're just kind of the way that all goes. But sometimes when I hear people outside the bubble of SEC country talking about SEC football, it's just such a reminder to me. It stands as a reminder to me for why a show like this even exists. Because I think that there is a way in which what I'll call like national media types, people who do their show from New York or Los Angeles or places like that, they just have a way of looking at SEC fans as sort of a weird other. And they come up with all kinds of reasons for why SEC fans are that way. But the one thing it just kind of comes back to over and over again is that SEC fans, college football fans that live here in the Deep South, would dare decide that while the National Football League is clearly the sport at the highest level, and while the National Football League is undeniably the most popular sporting event, sports entity here in North America, that be that as it may, we still don't care. Be that as it may, we'll watch NFL football on Sundays, but we'll live and die with college football on Saturdays. That the NFL may be the best version of the sport, the most talented example of the sport, and it may be the most popular example of the sport. But we got our thing down here that we like better, and that's college football. And to certain people, national media folks, that's always just going to be a little bit weird. Colin Cowherd, the latest example of this. Now, I'm going to play you a little bit of this, and we're going to get to some fairly ridiculous stuff from Cowherd here in a moment. But it all starts with Tim Tebow getting cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, no one denied that Tebow is an SEC icon. Now, there are many SEC icons. Tebow is certainly one of those, led Florida to a national championship, popular with Gators fans forever because of that. But to someone like Colin Cowherd, who you've seen on the radio, seen on TV, whatever else, that he actually kind of views the scenario with Tebow as some sort of larger indictment of the SEC. The reasoning on this is pretty strange, but I want you to get a chance to hear some of that right now. This is Colin Cowherd talking about Tim Tebow being cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Take a listen to this.
Let's be honest about the Tebow story. It is mostly a Southern story. It is now mostly an SEC story. That's the only group of people who are still really defending him. But I think part of why the South has always struggled with Tebow is because the SEC defines the South's football passion. They love the SEC, and it's the best football conference, and they love their Saturdays more than they love their Sundays. But Tim Tebow is another example, and there's lots of them, of a great Saturday player who was never close to being a Sunday player.
So I think it's really interesting from Colin Cowherd, a couple of things that he says there. First of all, did you notice at the beginning of that clip the way that he says the word Southern, the way that there's like this level of disdain that almost drips off his voice? The Southern thing, the SEC thing. Boy, you can really read a lot into that. But then he goes on to talk about the way that the South, the SEC part of the country, has kind of struggled with Tim Tebow. There is no struggle down here with Tim Tebow. Frankly, Tim Tebow played at Florida a long time ago. If you watch a show like this on a normal basis, there's not much chatter about Tim Tebow all the way around. The folks that seem to be struggling with Tebow are those kind of outside the SEC footprint here. I mean, after all, it wasn't a Deep South team like the Atlanta Braves that made Tebow a member of their baseball organization and put him in AAA and let him hit a few home runs while not doing much else. It was the New York Mets. That's not the South. There's no Southern struggle there when it comes to Tim Tebow with that. It was the Mets who did that for him. And frankly, it's, shows based outside the South on ESPN, Skip Bayless on Fox, Colin Cowherd right there on Fox. It's people outside the SEC who seem to be obsessing the most over Tim Tebow. The honest truth is, on a show like this, in a normal given week, given time, we're actually not talking that much about Tim Tebow anymore. Now, would we have been in 2008 and 2009 and 2007? Of course we would have been. But all of a sudden that starts to feel like a long time ago now, which, by the way, is not great news for Florida fans when you want to think about your last national championship suddenly feeling a lot more into the rearview mirror than maybe you possibly realize it did. But what Cowherd says there about Tebow is, I actually bring this up for another reason. Because once again, if you want to know why shows like this exist, SEC Country Live, why something like this matters, is because we think facts matter, right? And we think that the people who have a hard time coming to grips with the fact that some of us down here just simply like college football better than we like the NFL, and we do have, if you're a Florida fan, fond memories of Tim Tebow, or if you're an Auburn fan, fond memories of whatever guy that came through your program that maybe not necessarily was a great NFL player, or Bama fan, or LSU fan, or whoever else, that it's important to keep all that in context, and you don't have to make up facts as a way of trying to explain why that's not a very good thing. So in terms of starting from a point of Tim Tebow and whatever he was as an NFL quarterback and failed experiment playing tight end for the Jaguars, listen to the direction that Colin Cowherd goes to basically use the example of Tim Tebow to suggest the entirety of the SEC is overrated. Frankly, this is such an exaggeration that almost boggles the mind that you could even come up with this. But once again, for SEC fans, it's important to know what's being said about your league in the dark corners of the national media. Colin Cowherd again, this time talking about the SEC.
Let's take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's look at the best team in football, easily the best roster. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One true SEC guy, Devin White. Because Mike Evans signed with A&M when they were a Big 12 team. They transitioned, so did he to the SEC.
So he cites the example of the Tampa Bay Bucks because supposedly they have no SEC representation. And then in the midst of that discussion mentions two SEC names. Mike Evans, no matter what he says, A&M's an SEC team now. Mike Evans played in the SEC while he played at Texas A&M, no matter what league they were in when he signed at Texas A&M. And then obviously Devin White. And if you watch the Super Bowl, you certainly saw the Tampa Bay Bucks not likely to win that game had it not been from the contribution they got from Devin White, who played for the Bucks in the Super Bowl, much the same way he played in the SEC for LSU. So Cowherd's own example here is actually a counterexample to his point that somehow the Tampa Bay Bucks proved the SEC is overrated when the SEC player, two of them that were on that roster, were a big reason why they won the Super Bowl. In White's case, especially in the game itself that was the Super Bowl, they probably don't win it without him. But still, Cowherd goes on to try to make the argument that not only is the SEC overrated, the flagship program in the SEC right now, Alabama, they may be overrated too on the basis of something to do with the NFL. This is all really strange, but let me let you hear Colin Cowherd again.
Why of the last 10 quarterbacks who played in the Super Bowl, none have been from the SEC? The 14 quarterbacks who made the playoffs last year, none were from the SEC. That's Saturday football. The last 5 MVPs of the NFL quarterbacked at Cal, Louisville, Texas Tech, Michigan, and Boston College. The 3 greatest wide receivers I've ever seen went to Mississippi Valley State, Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Marshall. Walter Payton's the best running back I've ever seen. I think he went to Jackson State. Being a star on Saturday doesn't mean much. Half of Nick Saban's guys that go to the NFL underachieve, get cut, can't play, or overpaid. And they're easily the most dominant college football program I've ever seen for a decade. So don't take it personally. Big on Saturday does not mean great on Sunday.
So let me make a point that you already know, but you maybe haven't quite articulated it the same way that I'm about to say it right now. The only way that you could get away with spouting factual inaccuracies like that, somehow that Alabama hasn't been good at putting players in the NFL because, quote, half of them haven't gone on to be all pros, whatever else. Find me any program anywhere that's going to have a batting average of much above 50% when it comes to hitting on its NFL talent, or saying the Tampa Bay Bucks have no SEC guys when, as we said before, they clearly do. The only way you can get away with spouting those kinds of factual inaccuracies, or the only way you could even conjure up a notion that pushing that is even a good thing to do. The only way that works is if you view people in the Deep South who care about the SEC more than what Fox and ESPN and the big national networks tell us we should care about. The only way you could do that is because if somehow you view that as some sort of problem. In fact, Cowherd, in his own words, talked about the idea of it being a problem to care about the SEC, to care about college football, to care more about Saturdays than Sundays. But listen, SEC fans aren't going to apologize for that, and Florida fans aren't going to apologize for still liking Tim Tebow. Frankly, it's a bad sign for the Jacksonville Jaguars that what someone would have done in college more than a decade ago is more relevant than what's happening in Jacksonville right now, even after hiring Urban Meyer as a head coach, drafting Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne and guys like that. The fact that the Tebow legacy from now more than 10 years ago in Gainesville still stands as the kind of prominent thing that casts a shadow over the rest of the Jaguars organization speaks to the problem with the NFL, not any kind of problem with the SEC and college football. You already know this. There are people that simply do not like us because we like college football more than the NFL, and Colin Cowherd may be the example of that. It's good to have you on SEC Country Live here today. I'm Brandon Adams. We've got a lot we're going to do around the world of college football here over the course of the next few minutes. We'll get back to the Georgia injury news that I mentioned with you a moment ago as the Dogs try to figure out how ready they are for whatever's going to happen against Clemson week 1. We'll also get an update on the line movement in the Georgia-Clemson game, which had been moving in Georgia's direction, but maybe that's about to change. We'll talk more about that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, speaking of the Alabama Crimson Tide, we talked about them and the relationship to what Colin Cowherd had to say there. And there was some very interesting reaction from Alabama fans on social media here over the course of the last couple of days related to one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football. One of the things that has stood as a gigantic rivalry in this sport now for quite some time. We think of it as the third Saturday in October, Alabama and Tennessee. But unfortunately, that rivalry has not mattered in quite some time because Tennessee's just been awful. And there's really no evidence to believe that Tennessee will be less than awful this year. In fact, I have them as one of the 3 worst teams in the SEC, and probably only Vanderbilt is certainly worse on paper than what Tennessee is right now. And maybe one of the pieces of evidence that proves that point is the fact that Vols fans have returned tickets, given the chance to buy tickets to be in Tuscaloosa for the third Saturday in October and the chance to see that game there against Alabama, the hated rival that is Alabama. Some Tennessee fans have decided they don't want to do that. Now, I want to show you the tweet from Alabama, and I'll show you at least one of the responses here. So what Alabama writes in to say, just released, due to visiting team returns, tickets are now on sale for Alabama's homecoming game against Tennessee on October the 23rd. Now, a bunch of Alabama fans were kind of weighing in on this, saying, how lowly Tennessee is now that their fans don't even want to come to Tuscaloosa anymore, to say nothing of the fact that the game is homecoming for Alabama. What Dan Wolken from USA Today writes is, I know people will dunk on Tennessee for this, but honestly, not going to Tuscaloosa to watch that game is probably the most rational thing Tennessee fans have done in a generation. So obviously Wolken taking a shot at Tennessee fans who've taken a shot at him plenty, and with good reason, based on some of his humiliatingly awful reporting during the transition from John Curry away from Tennessee athletic director, the near hire of Greg Schiano as head coach. Wolken and Tennessee have a little bit of a rivalry ongoing as it is. But on the point of Alabama having more tickets to sell to Tennessee because Vols fans don't want to travel to see their team, I mean, I'm not a Tennessee fan and I'm not an Alabama fan, but I am an SEC fan. As I said before, I don't apologize for being an SEC homer, and no matter what Colin Cowherd thinks about it, I don't apologize for liking college football more than I like a professional football. And as someone who feels that way, history and tradition has always mattered to me. It's always been something that's important and kind of worth preserving. And the third Saturday in October is really an example of that. It's the kind of thing that hasn't meant very much in recent years and probably needs to mean something more in the future. I mean, it is entirely possible for a rivalry just to disappear. I mean, not everything that has lasted for a long time continues to last forever. Think about, Circuit City, Blockbuster Video, all these kinds of like venerable brands and companies that you may have grown up with. You look around now, you don't see them. Just because something used to be big and used to exist doesn't mean that it will exist forever. And it is reasonable that in future years, Tennessee-Alabama as a rivalry, in future years, it may have no connection to that whatsoever because we keep raising more and more young people who have not grown up in a time in which this rivalry was a thing. Now, what's funny about that is if you want to rewind pre-Nick Saban, Tennessee actually dominated the Alabama rivalry almost as much as Alabama's doing it now, but so much of college football history just seems to be split in time by the Nick Saban era that it's very hard to even imagine a time in which that was true. Very hard to imagine a time in which Tennessee had the best of Alabama. And the world we're living in right now where Alabama has just won this streak year after year after year with really showing no signs of it changing anytime soon. I mean, I do think you have to be careful if you're a Tennessee fan or just an SEC fan who appreciates the traditions that this league has once had. I think you have to be careful that this thing doesn't completely dissolve and simply doesn't exist anymore as a rivalry worth caring about because we're about to have this discussion, right? I mean, Texas and Oklahoma are coming into the SEC. We're going to have to figure out some new scheduling parameters once they do, and there's this talk of which of the games that are currently being played have to be preserved in the future. And you'd say, well, the Iron Bowl is going to take place. Alabama's got to play Auburn. And before we'd have said, well, Georgia-Auburn's going to take place. That's a game that's got to still happen. And people would have said, well, third Saturday in October, Tennessee and Alabama, that's got to still take place. Given the fact that Vols fans don't even want to go to Tuscaloosa to see this game, you got to wonder if some Vols fans might be thinking when it's time to redo the schedule of, actually, maybe we don't have to play Alabama every single year. Yes, my grandfather grew up going to those games, but maybe now, maybe in this generation, maybe, new year, new me, maybe we don't have to play Alabama every single year anymore if you're a Tennessee fan. Which, that kind of lowly attitude, that kind of feeling around the Tennessee program right now, I mean, that's the real problem that Josh Heupel inherits when he takes this job. The fact that Tennessee was a once proud, mighty program that has generations worth of fans, hundreds of thousands of people kind of think of themselves as VFL, Vols for Life, and yet they're not proud of their program right now. They're not even proud enough to travel with it to a road game in Tuscaloosa to see an opponent they've hated for, as long as they've been alive and who their ancestors hated before they were even born. It's an issue for Josh Heupel. And I think my advice to coaches like Heupel would be to be careful how you talk about stuff like this, because the thing that you may think is smart is actually maybe not quite as smart as you think. You may be of the belief that, hey, I got a grizzly bear on the other side in this rivalry, and the big measuring stick for me at Tennessee is a real tough load to deal with in Alabama, so I better be very, very careful how I talk. Honestly, I'm not sure you gain very much for that. I want to give you an example from SEC Media Days. Heupel being asked, hey, Tennessee hasn't beaten Alabama in a long time. And you could add to that, and Tennessee fans don't even want to watch Tennessee play Alabama anymore. What do you plan on doing about that if you're Josh Heupel? He was asked some version of that question at SEC Media Days, and he gave an answer, although for my taste, it wasn't as strong an answer as he could have given. Take a listen to this.
That ball game's huge to the fan base and to our players, right? On both sides of it. You come to Tennessee to play in games like that. But it's not about just one game this fall as we move forward, right? Our players understand that we're only as good as our next performance, right? And for us as a coaching staff and players, we have to take a one-day approach at it. And that means we can control today. We can't control 3 months from now. We can control today. If we take care of today and follow that up consistently, we're going to put ourselves in the best position to get where we want to go long term.
There are some coaches who never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I think in this case, Heupel misses an opportunity. He's asked about what do you do to get back in the rivalry against Alabama, and his answer is to essentially pivot to, hey, it's one game at a time, and there's no opponent that matters more to us than anything else. That's just the wrong task to take. And it's not because I think that Heupel and Tennessee are going to beat Alabama anytime soon. I actually kind of don't. But you know what? There's very little risked by saying, hey, my job as Tennessee coach is to make the third Saturday in October matter again. And I don't know if that happens this year, if it happens next year, but you better believe I'm going to spend every waking moment trying to make Tennessee-Alabama feel like a rivalry again. If Josh Heupel says that, is anything hurt by that? Is anything harmed by that? And you say, well, BA, he's putting a spotlight on the game against Alabama. But here's the point. For right now, there is still a spotlight on that game no matter what Heupel does, no matter what Heupel says. For right now, the rivalry still exists. Now, 10 years from now, it may have moved on. It may not exist anymore. It may be like what LSU-Tulane used to be, a rivalry that got played half a century ago that nobody cares about anymore. But for now, there are still plenty of people, still some people who care about Alabama-Tennessee. And if Heupel is not competitive against Alabama, he's going to get fired no matter what. He's going to get fired within the next couple of years if he can't do something to make those games feel more competitive and make Tennessee fans feel like they got a shot there. He's going to get fired anyway. So the idea that he pretends like Alabama is a game no different for Tennessee than any other, honestly, I'm not quite so sure that's such a successful strategy, given the fact that's going to be the measuring stick for you, whether you acknowledge or not. So why not acknowledge it? Why not take it on? Lane Kiffin once did that when Urban Meyer was the coach at Florida, and in the follow-up to Kiffin saying some of the things he said about Urban Meyer, Tennessee actually got beaten up on the field pretty bad that day, and Kiffin probably called an intentional game plan to keep the game from getting more out of hand than it was. But Kiffin also earned some notoriety along the way with doing that. Josh Heupel has zero name recognition in the SEC. People don't care about an Oklahoma quarterback in this league. People don't care about a former Missouri offensive coordinator when he was only there for a small, cup of coffee's worth of time. People don't care about the recent head coach at UCF. SEC fans really don't know very much about Josh Heupel. He's got to introduce themselves to fans. And so when he's asked a question about a rivalry against Alabama, a rivalry that some Tennessee fans have waved the white flag on so much they don't even want to go to Tuscaloosa to see the game, this would be a good way for him to introduce himself to those SEC fans and say, yeah, you know what, third Saturday in October, I've got that date circled. We're going to surprise the world. We're going to do something big. It may be hollow, praise. It may be, ludicrous hype. But you know what? Sometimes that kind of stuff sort of works out. I don't think you can run from it, though. Tennessee still has to look at Alabama as a measuring stick, no matter how inferior they may seem by comparison. Good to have you with us here today on SEC Country Live. I teased this a little earlier, and I'll take some of your comments in a moment about, the Tennessee-Alabama situation. You want to weigh in on Colin Cowherd bashing the SEC. You can do all of that with us in a moment. I do want to get to some interesting news breaking out of Georgia, though. And we'll talk to Barry Barger about this more in a moment from BetUS. We've seen some line movement in favor of Georgia when it comes to week one against Clemson. Maybe now that could go the other way. For the most part, injuries don't move lines as much as some people think they do. But for Georgia, this stuff is starting to pile up a little bit. Right now, Eric Gilbert, the former LSU tight end, transferring to Georgia with the thoughts of maybe being a wide receiver. He's away from the program right now, dealing with what Kirby Smart has described as a personal issue. Georgia's starting center Warren Erickson's out at least for now. Georgia having to work out other guys at that center position. And now you're talking about Tyke Smith, a recent transfer from West Virginia who was an All-American for the Mountaineers a year ago. He's now dealing with a foot injury that's going to keep him out for, 3 to 4 weeks, we're saying, is the expected timeline on that. Similar scenario, ironically, the fact that the injury seems so similar for Darnell Washington, a big-time tight end who came on for Georgia at the end of last season. Big performance in the regular season finale against Missouri, big performance in the bowl game against Cincinnati, a former 5-star recruit who really looked the part of that by the end of last season and who has big expectations for what he might be able to do this year. He's also dealing with a foot injury there too. Once again, kind of a 3 to 4 week, timeline on the Washington scenario, as been commonly reported. This is not good for Georgia fans, and it really kind of flies in the face of something that the SEC Network host Peter Burns said when he joined me on my show earlier this week, Dog Nation Daily. That's the other show that I do besides SEC Country Live. And what I had talked to Peter Burns about was the fact that most of the well-known media types, whether it be regional media that works for the SEC Network or nationally known names who work for ESPN or Fox or something like that, we really hadn't heard a lot of people with big followings picking Georgia to win the national championship. But Peter, far before he knew about these current injuries that Georgia was dealing with, had made his case for UGA, and when he joined me on my show yesterday, emphatically echoed his belief that Georgia truly is the best team in the country. How do the injuries change all that? We'll try to figure that out. But this is what Peter Burns said yesterday.
I am shocked. How in the hell am I the only person that sees what's developing in Athens over the last couple of years and not think that this team is the best team in the country? Like, this was shocking to me, when you reached out and I heard that. I mean, I don't know if people are so just, laser focused on 1980, but who the hell cares about if it's been 1 year, 6 years or 60 years? Like, the team is the team, and I'm shocked. And hell, I was shocked they came in at fifth in the USA Today Coaches Bowl.
Steve Weaver saying this is Georgia fans already making excuses. The actual truth is, I think you won't hear that much of that from Georgia fans. I think what you will hear from Georgia fans, and, full disclosure, I am one. I think what you will hear from most Georgia fans is just a sense of disappointment, right? Because the weight of, as Peter Burns says, they are 1980 since Georgia won a national championship. No matter how much trolling may go on from especially Florida fans, but all non-UGA fans about the national title drought that Georgia is forced to endure, the truth is it's Georgia fans themselves that are far more acquainted with that than any troll could remind them of. They are truly restless. They are ready for that to no longer be true. They are ready to win a national championship and break through on that. And I think Georgia fans believe that if they are as talented as Peter Burns described there, then weathering an injury or two shouldn't be that difficult to do, that you ought to have the kind of depth, you ought to have the kind of talent that makes that easy. I think the problem, though, becomes when you start to compound these things. When it's Erickson plus Tyke Smith plus Darnell Washington, when it's Eric Gilbert in his current absence from the program, when it's, whatever else may be kind of going on, Georgia missing some receivers right now, Jermaine Burton, Kyrus Jackson. When you have these things add up, and it's true that every team kind of has the same kind of thing, all of a sudden you wonder if your margin for error, the kind of thing that makes Peter Burns want to pick Georgia to win the national championship, all of a sudden if you've given that away before the season even begins. But if you're a Georgia fan kind of on the fence about that and feeling a little concerned about what all this means, Peter Burns is here once again to give you some confident talk about why you ought to believe in UGA. This, the SEC Network host, once again.
Every year when we go down to SEC Media Days, the story that you hear and I always come out with is not what the guys said at the podium. It's how they interact with us behind the scenes. Each year, Kirby's come in kind of tight, to be honest with you. He's just like laser focused. I'm going to be this, and this. He comes in, last couple of weeks ago, and he knows that I'm a big golfer, and the first thing he comes up, he finds his way over to me, and he goes, "Where'd you play lately?" And then he starts showing me videos of places, and I'm like, this is not the Kirby Smart that I've seen before where he was kind of, oh, well, this is media days, and I got to do this. I was like, this is the attitude of a guy that knows this team is pretty damn good. He doesn't really have that many tough questions to answer, and he's chomping at the bit, and that tells me a lot more about the success he thinks this team can have versus anything else.
So I was going to play another audio clip from Peter Burns. Let me just leave that one alone, Connor, and we'll just make that the last one from Peter Burns there. And I do think what Peter says is pretty interesting, right? That the mood of a coach matters. The kinds of things that are said at SEC Media Days behind the scenes, before the interview takes place. I do think they can be revealing. And when Peter Burns says, hey, back in July, I found a very relaxed version of Kirby Smart. I found somebody who appeared pretty comfortable in his own skin, pretty confident in whatever his team was bringing to the table for the upcoming season, so much so that he was eager and able to talk about things other than football and talking about some of the fun that he'd been having playing golf during the summer. If Peter Burns says that's the way that he found Kirby Smart when he was preparing to interview him for the SEC Network, that's the kind of statement that would hold some weight with me. However, I think one of the things that some Georgia fans will be left to wonder is, well, if he was confident and comfortable back in July, now that you've just added a Tyke Smith injury and a Darnell Washington injury to go on top of some of the other things this program is dealing with, would he still feel the same way? Is the mood changing? Is there some concern now that starts to creep in that maybe didn't exist before all of this went down? To say nothing of the fact that, they're also still trying to overcome the George Pickens injury that took place during the spring. I think those are all very fair questions. In fact, coming up in just a moment, we'll ask Barry Barger from BetUS how a series of injuries could impact Georgia when it comes to its opening line against Clemson and any of these other injuries we may see as we head into the opening week of the season. While we're getting Barry, though, let me get a couple of your comments here on SEC Country Live there as well. Chris Walscott says, I feel it's on our offensive line, and for Georgia for this upcoming season, that may very well be the case, that you will be leaning on that offensive line a little bit more. Brent Smith gives you a go Tigers. We talked Tennessee a little earlier. Paul Batt saying Tennessee's incoming freshmen were 3 the last time Tennessee beat Alabama, and that's kind of all you need to know about that. One of the reasons why Vols fans might be feeling so dejected that they don't want to go to Tuscaloosa, and the real challenge facing Josh Heupel as he tries to do something about that. To make Tennessee fans care about Alabama again would also have the byproduct of making Tennessee fans care about Tennessee again, because here's the thing, and every SEC fan at some point in time has probably been there with their program, if you want to go back over a long enough period of time, that the real issue that a coach faces and a program faces isn't when your fans are mad at you. It's when they've decided they don't care anymore. And Tennessee fans have been mad at their coach, mad at their program, mad at their AD plenty. But at a certain point in time, you decide you've given all the anger that you've got to give. You don't have any of that left anymore. And at that point in time, it's about the apathy of why do I even care about this? And boy, for Tennessee, who's had failed coach after failed coach after failed coach, I think the issue you run into now is, can you still convince Tennessee fans to care about their own program anymore? And the easiest way to do that is to make them believe they still have a rivalry with the Crimson Tide, a team they grew up hating. Let's get a couple more here, and we'll talk to our buddy Barry Barger after that. Chris Pack says I was trying to back up some excuses for Georgia. The truth is I'm not. Now, listen, I don't mind telling you, and like a lot of these people in the media who might not reveal this, I'm happy to tell you that I do a Georgia show every day. I've been a Georgia fan my entire life. I want Georgia to win the national championship. As a fan of UGA, I'm disappointed that there are a couple of significant injuries that we're talking about now on the heels of Georgia trying to recover from a couple of other injuries. But I'm not going to make excuses and say this ought to eliminate Georgia from championship contention, but I am concerned about it. I'm concerned about what Georgia's going to do in light of that. Tyke Smith is a projected starter. Darnell Washington, projected starter, one of the important pieces of the Georgia offense. These are clearly issues for Georgia to deal with. I'm not going to say, well, that's it. Georgia ought to pack up the season, and anybody who beats Georgia doesn't count because Georgia's got a couple of guys hurt. I'm definitely not going to say that, but there are, clearly some concerns there when you talk about injuries like this. Douglas Lambert reaches out to say, are we practicing in a cow pasture? What's up with all these injuries? And that's a pretty common thing for, I think, fans to consider when you do have a series of injuries like this that compound together, especially in the case, of multiple foot injuries or, just the series of injuries coming kind of close together and all of this. I think there is a tendency to wonder, well, is something going on in the program that's cause for blame for this? And you want to go back to years ago in SEC Country Live? We talked about this one time in which Auburn, when it was coached by Gus Malzahn, had a series of defensive back injuries, or when Alabama a couple of years ago had a series of linebacker injuries, and Georgia now dealing with its own series of injuries that I think fans have a tendency, and I believe it's erroneous, and sometimes I think even the media, the way in which the media tries to report this stuff, connecting dots together that may not naturally be connected. I think all of this is an example of seeking a person to blame, a thing to blame, when sometimes there may not be. Not field conditions, not the way in which Georgia's practicing or anything along those lines. Sometimes you just get injuries. Sometimes it just sort of happens, and there's very little you can do about it. So for me personally, there won't be a bunch of blame on my part for why this has gone down, but obviously for some people, that's going to be the thing you kind of do there. Let's get a few more of these comments. And David Martin says he predicts that Georgia will take a backseat to Florida again this year. David, I'll tell you that I am amazed by how quiet the chatter has been about Florida so far throughout this offseason. In fact, you see Florida fairly prominently represented in both the official preseason polls that have come out lately. They were 11th in the coaches poll. They were 13th in the AP poll. But, man, you really don't see a lot of chatter overall about people who expect Florida to provide much in the way of a defense of the SEC East crown they won a year ago. So I think that Florida, in the remaining days of the kind of preseason mode that we're in right now, getting ready for the upcoming season, Is there some hype coming out of Gainesville related to Emory Jones? Is there some hype related to what DeMarcus Bowman's going to be at running back and the way in which, I heard some great things from the scrimmage the other day about Javon Dexter, the big-time pass rusher that Florida has. Sounds like he had a very good scrimmage the other day, but in terms of a Florida team that really got embarrassed defensively at the end of last year, is Dexter on his way to helping Todd Grantham reestablish his reputation as a coach and helping the Gators reestablish their defensive identity? I think it's been an incredibly quiet offseason at Florida, and I'm curious to see how quiet it remains before we actually start kicking off games on September 4th, because there is not much talk coming out of Gainesville right now, although interesting to see David stepping up to speak up for his team there. Steve Weaver, as I said before, kind of criticizing what he believes UGA fans are for making some excuses. Brent Smith also weighing in to say about the Ole Miss-Tennessee game, one of those cross-division games that will take place in the SEC here this year. And I think we talked about this last week briefly. Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin has been already playing Rocky Top during some of those Ole Miss practices, getting ready for that game against Tennessee. So that's one of those cross-divisional games that are going to take place. We'll get back to your comments here in a moment. For now, though, I want to keep the conversation going that we're just having with some injury news going down here, maybe impacting the lines for week one. Let's talk to our buddy Barry Barger right now from BetUS. Of course, you know BetUS because they've been doing this now for more than 25 years. America's favorite sports book. Your chance to get in and take advantage of some incredible player perks that BetUS has for you right now. In fact, when you go to BetUS.com, when you sign up as a new customer, BetUS is going to give you 125% first deposit bonus just for doing that as a special incentive just for you. Check out BetUS.com for a lot more on that. Make sure you use the promo code SEC125 to take advantage of that. Barry Barger from BetUS joins us right now. Barry, good afternoon, and thanks for being with us here today on SEC Country Live. We hope that you're doing well.
Doing fantastic. It's football season. Can it get any better? I mean, my gosh.
Well, I think go ahead.
For your listeners, I just wanted to say that, we're doing big specials on crypto. So if you deposit by Bitcoin or something like that, use SEC 200, and if you deposit with crypto, and you'll get a 200%.
Wow.
On that thing. Yeah, so they're bumping it up, and I wanted to make sure I got that out to your listeners. Make sure you use your code, because that's when you hit the big bonuses with you guys.
That's that's good stuff there. SEC 200, take advantage of that crypto opportunity there to give an even bigger bonus. All fun stuff all the way around. Barry, what is not as fun for some people right now, and I want to show some of these week one lines as you can find right now at BetUS.com as you get ready to start making your week one bets here and start looking ahead at some of these early lines. Let's start with Georgia-Clemson for a moment, Barry, because there's actually been some movement in this game in favor of Georgia. This thing was above that key number of 3 at BetUS for a while, but now it's down to the Tigers as a 3-point favorite, moving in the direction of both the underdog and the dogs, DAWGS, Georgia on that. But Georgia's got a couple of key injuries now that are showing up. Guys whose availability now in question for the game against Clemson. A starting tight end, a starting defensive back. You've got some injuries at wide receiver. Georgia's starting center is out right now. From your perspective, how much do you think injuries like that have a tendency to possibly shift this line? Or for the smart bettor who wants to take advantage of those injuries, how much should he use those in his handicap of a game like this?
Oh, you know what? For one thing, that's a big move. Obviously, it's probably because you and I talked about this last week.
Sure, we're moving the line, Barry. I like that.
We are moving the line, but I'm telling you, we can do it, and that's a huge move, and that shows a lot of good money, big money, and so that means the wiser money is taking that 3.5. I mean, it came down to 3. That's such a huge move. For it to do that, that's some serious cash going down on the dogs, for sure. And, like we talked about last week in Georgia, this is the year to get Alabama. They're, of course, they'll probably have, as far as I can see, they have the best defense in the nation. And they're going to have to win by defense this year. I think they lost 7 offensive starters. I mean, include their quarterback and the Heisman winner. It's a tough go. So this is and Georgia returning, I think it's 20 starters, right, from their offense. So on offense and defense. So they are packed. They've got guys who've been playing together. So that means that Georgia people are getting smarter. And I said, like last week, I said, I expect that line to move. I would expect it to either move below 3. I would take the plus 3 still before it goes below that, because getting a field goal, that's such a huge number. As your listeners probably know, everybody, the 1, the 3, the 6, the 7, those are all huge numbers. And when it comes on or off those numbers, that's especially 3. To go 3.5 or to go to 2.5. If that goes to 2.5, that's just huge money. And I believe I said I would expect it to be down to 2 by the time the game went, or 2.5, because that's too much to give Georgia, and Clemson losing their quarterback and Georgia having all this. I talked about Alabama a little bit a minute ago, just because we can't help but talk about them when we talk about national championship or anything. But against Clemson, this is all these teams that lost their QBs, all the top teams. And, with Daniels there, Georgia's got solid play on both sides of their line, on their offense, on their defense. And like I said, you're getting 3 points. You have to play smart. A lot of people, you call them, public, or they like to bet the teams that are favored. So when you see it going in the direction of the underdog, that's really big, because that means that's probably a lot of wise money coming down on that. So you want to stick with the wise money if you can, truthfully.
Well, when it comes to like a big favorite like that, you mentioned Alabama a moment ago, a big favorite against Miami week 1, kind of a similar neutral site situation. In fact, let me show you those lines again on the screen, as you can find them at BetUS. Of course, you check out BetUS.com. Not only can you see these lines, but you can also take advantage of a couple great offers. Use the promo code SEC125 to get 125% initial bonus. Also, when you use SEC200, you can take advantage of their opportunity to deposit some crypto and get even more in your account as you get going here. But look at Alabama right now as a 19-point favorite against Miami. Barry, I like being a contrarian, but we see Alabama dominate week 1 in games like this all the time. Is 19 too much for you right there? Is that a stay away? Or do you say the Alabama track record week 1 of blowing through these non-conference opponents is so well established that I'm just going to trust them to be able to do that right now?
Well, personally, since Alabama's such a public favorite and such a big, I would wait if you're going to take the underdog, because I would expect that line to actually move up. And if it moves up to 21, that's great if you're going with the dog. But if you're betting Alabama, I would take them now. If you're going to the side of Miami, I would wait, because I expect that line to go up to at least 20 and a half. And, in this game, the little advantages you can take, you've got to do that, because your percentages really go up. They make a difference. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of a basic way of how to follow that and how to do that, because usually you can tell which way the line's going to go. Georgia figured that was going the way it did, because 3.5, that's a lot of points to give to Georgia when Clemson's, they lost Trevor Lawrence. They've got a guy that's just going to lock right in there, but you don't have guys that have been playing together in game situations, especially with the quarterback. And as little as that may seem, it's a difference. It's a difference. And with Bama, of course, they reload every time, and Bama scares me. So that's why, if I were to get a bet against them, I'm waiting. I'm waiting on those real popular teams. You want to wait close to kickoff if you can, because the line's public's going to move that line. It's going to get bigger, because just like what you said, everybody knows that they dominate like that, and everybody loves Alabama. They're one of those public teams that everybody likes to get on. And when you have a public team like that, you want to wait, because the closer it gets to game time, the more that line moves. But if it got to 21, I would take the 21. I wouldn't wait for it to go to 21.5 because a lot of times it'll go to 21, it'll come back down to 20.5, 20, and you want to maximize it. So if I saw that go to 21, I would take the money and just bam and be done with it. Otherwise, Alabama scares me, like I said. So if you love them, lay the 19 now and do it. I mean, I would get down earlier than later on something like that. With that defense, who knows? I mean, what they could shut down. I mean, Miami's they got a storied university, and to give any great team week one that many points is a lot. So personally, I'd wait and either take the points, or I would stay away because I don't like giving that many points, even with Alabama.
Sure,
it's just play a fun bet. If you're a $100 player, put 20 on it. To have fun with the game or something like that, or 10 or whatever. But it's or maybe look at the total.
No, yeah, it's something to think about there too. Barry, good stuff all the way around. Thanks so much for being with us today. Let's remind folks one more time, though. Go to BetUS.com, use the promo code SEC125, get that 125% deposit bonus when you get going there, but also when you use crypto, even more savings there as well. Tell us one more time about SEC 200.
Yeah, SEC 200, cryptocurrency, but deposit with Bitcoin or anything, make sure you use the SEC 200. It's worth it. You're getting almost double the bonus. To start off ahead like that, that's what you want to do.
Boy, you
that's
love
what
that.
You want to do, and it's going to be Georgia Bama in the SEC conference final, obviously. And I was listening to like a VSiN or something today, and they had Georgia winning the East by 2.7 games, Alabama winning the West by 2.2 games.
Yeah.
So it's bet smart. It's bet smart. Bet with BetUS because those bonuses, we do promotions. We got UFC pool, all this stuff. Look at the site too. You can peruse it. It's very simple, and there's all kinds of handicapping help on there too.
That's exactly right. It's not just college football. It's all the preseason stuff for the pros and the UFC and everything else. Great time of year. Baseball as we head down the stretch. Good stuff all the way around. Barry, we'll talk to you very soon.
Incredible. Thank you very much.
Good stuff there. Barry Barker, BetUS. Check him out at BetUS.com. Use the promo code SEC125. Get a 125% deposit bonus as you get going. Let me also apologize to some of our Facebook friends here because I guess we had a little bit of spam that came in the Facebook comment section. This is the first time I've ever noticed this before. I don't think it's ever happened before. So for those of you that are dealing with that, I apologize. I'll take a few more comments there as well. By the way, Scotty Gorup volunteered to be a moderator for us on Facebook. He said, not only will I get rid of the spam, I'll also get rid of all the Florida fans too. So pretty funny stuff from Scotty there on that. So pretty good stuff there. We'll get a couple more here. Jeff Davis checking in to say Kentucky's beaten Florida once in their last 34 games. The rosters aren't comparable, so a little bit of chatter between some Kentucky fans and some Florida fans going on here. Of course, a couple of years ago, we did see Kentucky break that long losing streak of games against the Florida Gators, and they'd like to do that again. We're actually going to have something on Will Levis, the brand new Kentucky starting quarterback. We're going to have that before we're done here today there as well. David Austin says he thinks the Trolls are from the Pac-12, and David's a big Texas A&M fan. He may indeed be right about that. We may have some Pac-12 infiltration in the program here today. Paul Batts also checking into the comment section there too, saying earlier that what Colin Cowherd did, which we started the show with, is the kind of thing that he does each and every year. I just think it's kind of a reminder. There are people kind of outside the SEC footprint who just like to see the SEC kind of picked on and beaten up on every now and then. And, kind of another example of that right there when it comes to all that. Jay Shipes checking in on the YouTube side of things. Tennille Calvino there as well. She says Ole Miss will not be running the West. That's kind of a continuation of a conversation that's been going on YouTube. And I have to say I probably agree with Tennille on that. Our buddy G. Grace, Bama Boy, holding things down from the Alabama fan perspective over here on YouTube too. He says Bama's only lost 2 games in 2 seasons out of 15, so he's feeling pretty good about his Alabama Crimson Tide right now. Johnny Lester predicts the Dogs are going to run the table the rest of the season, have a chance to get healthy and win in the playoffs. He says there's some positivity for you, essentially saying no matter what happens in the game against Clemson. So obviously Georgia fans, and there are a lot of them in our YouTube comment section, trying to make sense of the current injury situation with the Dogs. Speaking of the Dogs, I want to mention this as we roll on here on SEC Country Live and check in on our All Points Bulletin. Some of the big stories going on around the SEC. I thought that Philip Marshall, who does a good job covering the Auburn Tigers for 247sports.com, had an interesting take the other day. His prediction that he believes in year one, Brian Harsin will beat either Alabama or Auburn, one or the two. And what's funny is, while Alabama has been clearly the class of college football, if you look at recent history for Auburn, it would suggest that beating Georgia is more difficult for Auburn than beating Alabama. Auburn did beat Alabama both 2017 and 2019, and actually over the time of Gus Malzahn beat them 3 times at Jordan-Hare Stadium during the Gus Malzahn era. By comparison, a lot less success against UGA. So that's putting a lot on Brian Harsin when he first takes that job. And it kind of echoes something, if you care about the preseason magazines and things like that, in the preseason Lindy's magazine to kick off the upcoming, actually it was the Athlon magazine, to kick off the upcoming season. There was an anonymous coach quoted in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine that said that right there is the reason that Gus Malzahn's not here anymore. The inability to beat Georgia, the inability to beat Alabama, that's the reason that Gus Malzahn is no longer at Auburn. What this anonymous coach, quoted by Athlon Sports, said is a guy from Boise, Idaho, really going to change all of that? Well, the one thing that the Auburn reporter argued for at 247sports.com is that when Auburn has had success against Georgia, including 2017, it came at Jordan-Hare Stadium. That's where the game is right now. As I mentioned before, success versus Alabama and that building there too. I guess the one thing to keep in mind with all that, though, is that how loud and impressive the venue, the environment's going to be for Georgia-Auburn, Jordan-Hare Stadium come October. I think what's going to be largely depending on that is how Auburn does at LSU in the month of September, at Penn State in the month of September. Those early road tests in September for the Tigers are going to determine whether or not Auburn is even the kind of team that can draw a big crowd. We talked a moment ago about Tennessee fans not wanting to see, Tennessee against Alabama. Well, Auburn fans want to show up in large numbers at Jordan-Hare Stadium for the Georgia game if they've already lost twice. All of this speaks to the real challenge that Brian Harsin has awaiting him there at Auburn, in addition to the Alabama rivalry there as well. But as we've talked about before on the show, former Auburn great like Charles Barkley thinks that the way in which Harsin embraces all this challenge, when he could have just stayed up in Boise, Idaho and kept winning games there, he actually thinks it's probably a pretty good thing about Harsin that he even wants to take on this challenge. In fact, this is what Charles Barkley has said about that in the recent past. Here is Chuck.
I'm a big Coach Harsin fan. I think what he did takes tremendous courage, and I'm really, really excited to lead the confines of Boise, where you could probably win 7 or 8 games a year and live happily ever after, to come down to Alabama and take on King Kong. That takes tremendous courage and belief in yourself. So I'm really excited about Coach Harsin.
Here's my take on Auburn. I think they're going to be pretty good this year at beating bad teams, and I don't know if they're going to be very good at beating good teams, which means they're themselves not a very good team. Their over-under total from our friends at BetUS has been sitting at 6.5. I think 6-6 with a chance to be 7-5, but also in danger of falling to 5-7. I think that's about right for Auburn. And Auburn fans who want to see the validating win against a big rival, my belief is they'll have to wait a lot longer to be able to see that. Speaking of relatively new coach in the SEC, there's a little bit of buzz around Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. He said the Tigers recruiting much better as of late than we're used to seeing happening there in Como. And maybe now an even bigger chance to be a player on the scene for a 5-star wide receiver. Luther Burden, who up until yesterday was an Oklahoma commit, went on social media yesterday with a very nice-looking edit from Hayes Fawcett from On3 Sports to let it be known that he was no longer going to be a member of the Sooners 2022 class. In fact, I'll show this to you on the screen. Luther Burden making that announcement, saying that it's a business decision. He's, after talking with his family, opening things back up again. Now, Missouri's not the only school in this recruitment for Burden now. In fact, Oklahoma may still be a player here, and certainly Georgia is kind of a player here there too. But Missouri only being a couple of hours away from Burden's home in East St. Louis, Illinois, all of a sudden Missouri now feels like a real factor for Luther Burden. We have not seen Missouri in these kinds of discussions for five-star recruits very much, but in the case of Luther Burden, we might be seeing that. In fact, we're seeing Eli Drinkwitz even kind of show it off on social media, the idea that he's in kind of that five-star territory right now. I'll show you this. Drinkwitz put this out on Twitter yesterday of himself getting a brand new ride. And I mentioned this on my earlier show this morning, Dog Nation Daily. That's a good-looking Mercedes-Benz, but that's a little too cityfied for an SEC coach for my taste. I think we're seeing the big pickup trucks from most of the SEC coaches most of the time. But nonetheless, in the midst of that tweet there from Eli Drinkwitz, he talks about getting a five-star ride. A lot of people took the five-star language there from Drinkwitz to be a little bit of nod in the direction of Luther Burden. I think Missouri should be taken seriously in this recruitment. Ultimately, do I think he lands there? It's too early to say that, but we're seeing Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri win some recruiting battles that the Tigers typically haven't won, and showing off a brand new Mercedes and calling it a five-star ride while he's also in the mix for a five-star wide receiver. I'd say life is pretty good right now for Drinkwitz. And of all the first and second-year coaches in the SEC, Pittman and Kiffin and Mike Leach and Brian Harsin and Josh Heupel, I'd say the guy who may have gotten off to the best start with his career thus far in the league, I believe right now it's probably Eli Drinkwitz, and we'll see how he can build on that on the field here in 2021 there as well. I mentioned this a moment ago with our commenters, and I wanted to make sure I show this to you right now. So there was some big news coming out of Lexington this week that Joey Gatewood, the former Auburn quarterback, who maybe at one point in time some thought would be the starting quarterback there at Kentucky, kind of the guy who displaced Terry Wilson when he came in, well, actually, Gatewood ends up not winning that job. The guy who wins the job was a former Penn State quarterback who transferred in named Will Levis. And there are a lot of folks there in Lexington who seem to think that Levis has got a lot going for him as a player, and there's been some nice highlights that have escaped out of Lexington of some work that he's been doing at practice and a scrimmage. And, boy, this is a guy that's also used his legs well. He actually ran a little bit when he played there at Penn State. So for as many impressive highlights as Levis has put together, maybe one here that's not too impressive. I want to show you this on the screen here. So watch the way that Kentucky quarterback Will Levis eats a banana. Doesn't even tear the peel, just eats into it like that. He says it's actually tastes like eating banana nut bread or something like that. I have to admit something, and my mom won't be proud of me saying this. I think bananas are kind of gross anyway. I know they're good for you, but I think bananas overall are actually pretty gross. But to watch Levis eat this banana without even peeling it, I'm sorry, that's gross. He may go on to be a pretty good quarterback for the Kentucky Wildcats, but I don't know if I want to take his advice on how to eat banana anytime soon. So interesting stuff there from the Kentucky quarterback. Also interesting stuff with you here on SEC Country Live as per usual. We will close things out with a very enjoyable version of our SEC LOL in a moment, and it's actually a newly minted SEC team that we're going to show off on that. Let me squeeze one or two more comments in before we get ready to do that on SEC Country Live today. I'll take a few more YouTube comments. We'll do some more stuff on Facebook, and hopefully we've kind of run the trolls off on that side of things. Bob Williams checking in on YouTube to say he believes the SEC refs are the worst in the country. There are a lot of fan bases that might agree with you on that when it comes to the SEC. That was really funny a couple of years ago when the SEC started that SEC officiating Twitter account, and they've never really responded to anything. I haven't really even posted anything on that anymore. This is supposed to be their way of like having officiating transparency, and they've essentially abandoned the account. It's most weeks it's just Arkansas fans arguing for whatever reason they've been jobbed, because it seems like they've had more of those than almost anybody else has as well. Tennille Calvino says she freezes her bananas and put them in smoothies. I got no problem with that, Tennille. That's at least better than what the Kentucky quarterback's doing, eating the thing without a peel. I mean, I have to say that's pretty gross. Over here on the Facebook side of things, Kevin Green checking in to give you a go Dogs. This is not the Pro Football Hall of Famer, the late, great Kevin Green, by the way. It's different Kevin Green. Kevin Howard, not to be outdone, though, gives you a go Gators in the comment section on that. Paul Batts and Scotty Gorp going back and forth, a little bit of an argument here. Shannon Burgess says he missed getting to watch this show on a regular basis. Well, Shannon, we're at least glad to have you back here today, and thanks for contributing to our comment section. Don't forget, we're doing the show now every Wednesday at 3 p.m., and I certainly appreciate that. Paul Batts also saying that 1980 is still 1980 for Georgia. And, of course, if you're just joining us, there was some injury news for the Georgia front today. A couple of starters, or at least projected starters, one on defense, Tyke Smith, transferred from West Virginia, former five-star tight end Darnell Washington, both dealing with foot injuries, the kind of thing that could keep them out for 3 to 4 weeks, which obviously calls into question their status for the season opener there against Clemson. Rick Keene says on the subject of Nick Saban, and until he retires, the West is going to be owned by Alabama. And until Kirby learns how to in-game coach, they'll never reach the national championship. Well, as far as Nick Saban owning the SEC West, that wasn't true in 2019, and it wasn't true in 2017, and it wasn't true in even 2013. So, only twice in the last 4 years Alabama even actually won the SEC West. So while Alabama, makes the college football playoff with regularity and certainly has its share of national championships, it has not been a bulletproof ride in the SEC and West in recent years, and that's at least something to keep in mind. Vinny Mirabella says, is this guy still around? I think he means me. And yeah, Vinny, I'm still here. I got no plans to go anywhere anytime soon. And I'm glad you're still here today there as well. Kevin Zeminski says haters going to always hate, mentioning his Florida Gators. He doesn't like to see that Florida hate out there, but nonetheless, good stuff in the comment section with that. All right, so we'll wrap things up. It's our SEC LOL. This is one of those things that we like to kind of finish the show on kind of a lighthearted note, and the SEC is getting ready to bring in 2 brand new members to the conference, Oklahoma and Texas. There's been a lot of consternation about whether or not this is even really a good thing to do, whether it be, Oklahoma or Texas. It's really mostly Texas. People don't really like Texas very much. And if you need some video proof that maybe adding Texas to the SEC is not really a great thing to do, take a look at this video coming out of the Longhorns here of a few of their players, I guess, pretending to be a bicycle. I think that I'm going to sound like I'm 1,000 years old right now, but I'm going to say this anyway. I think that one of the worst things about social media, and one of the things that has definitely been a net negative for football, is in the world of like TikTok and Instagram and things like that, all of a sudden football players have decided they need to be cute now. And I don't think there's anything that goes less with football than cute. And so, yeah, I'm like everybody else. The video here of the Texas guys trying to be a bicycle, I don't need my football players to be cute, and I don't know that this look from Texas is going to fit in all that well with the SEC, but sooner rather than later, getting used to the Longhorns in this league is something we're going to have to certainly get used to. It is certainly on its way for that. We appreciate all of you being here on SEC Country Live here today. Always a fun conversation to be a part of. We do it every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Thanks for being here with it. By the time we speak again next week, we'll be that much closer to the start of the upcoming season. Can't wait to do all of that with you then. Thanks for being on SEC Country Live. We'll talk to you next week, everybody.